Hello.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a great lunch stream, I think. I think everybody's eating, so I think we'll have more listeners today than viewers.
I had no time to eat so far.
I had a quick snack, but I got some amazing beef ragu prepared that I've food prepped yesterday. So after stream is gonna be the big pasta carb coma. So I'm set up for the day. How are you doing today, Adrian?
Not stressful, but okay. Used to it. So without stress, I don't feel alive anymore. That's one of those caveats of being
Are you approaching burnout, or you have everything under control?
No, actually, I'm a person who cannot have burnout because I am too enthusiastic for things. So even though it's a bad day, next day will be a better day. You know, it's my brain always finds new opportunities here and there, and that helps me actually quite a lot to be an entrepreneur. This is I think part of that. Otherwise, you will have problems building up something and try to find distance from that. So that's actually not that easy. Yeah. But yeah, I don't want to complain. So it's okay. All good. All good. We have an interesting topic today.
Yes, our first viewers are starting to trickle in. So welcome. Let us know if chat is working. Give us a little hello in chat. Let us know how your day was going today. We are discussing data-driven engineering management today. I've recently been awarded the award for top mentor on MentorCruise, and it's not really my main product, but it's the most evergreen one. Coaching on MentorCruise is how I started. It's where I did most of my product research. Like, what to coach, what not to coach, what is worth it, what is not worth it, what is scalable. And the second thing I'm doing is I'm coaching teams with an organization that's a little bit more bespoke and customized. So I got awarded being a top mentor recently, and I figured, okay, I think I now have enough like insights, feedback, like ongoing data to actually spot some patterns about what engineering leaders, in 2024 are dealing with, what kind of advice they have absorbed early on in their careers that's not serving them, and it's not unique to their position. It's just, general background noise bullshit advice that they got from the industry or just absorbed from their peer group and non-technical founders and other peers, and then they just follow the trend. So I am primarily talking about various different forms of faux-agile or scrumfall or like weirdly implemented. We're kinda agile, but we're not doing it by the book, and we're kinda scrummy, but we're not right. So we have our own process, kind of. Right. So everybody who sort of fits in that category, I found they have like zero data-driven decision making. And what I'm working on with engineering leaders, usually we work on like de-stressing them ASAP. And then the second thing is to focus on making decisions based on data, not on how they're feeling. So that second part is actually what I want to share with the audience today. So as a big sort of preamble, here's the plan for today. The discussion primarily will be focusing on how to stop thinking about obsessively trying to manage a project and to go into thinking about how do I create product leadership in my team, right? So from project management to product leadership. This is very, very much Marty Kagan. If you've read Inspired, what's the middle one? Inspired and Transformed are books 1 and 3. The middle one escapes me right now. Hang on, Marty Kagan books. I did write them this in the Empowered. There we go. Mm-hmm. Right. So going from this journey of I want absolute control over the inputs and outputs of my project to going through I need to figure out what's actually going on. So these are the kinds of metrics that we're going to be discussing today and why they're important. And I figured we should start with I'm in chaos and I just want stability. So I'm not going to talk about like extremely high performer metrics, things that high performing teams do. Think, beyond metrics that Brian Finster will be interested in, because he's just by default practicing TDD and continuous delivery, and he is measuring different things than you would if, let's say, your engineering culture just lacks stability, lacks testing culture, lacks engineering culture, lacks refactoring, lacks collaborative processes. So the starter metrics are there for overall application, regardless of your industry, regardless of your size. You're a leader, you have a team, you have several teams, you might be having a team of teams. Just the starter metrics will definitely help.
I would have a book alternative if you don't want to use this topic today, which is that one, because that is what you need then in order to get things right. It is the survival guide.
Yeah.
How to find food on the street, how to find shelter when you can't pay anything anymore, all those kind of things, very important if you really don't do those things when you scale. So let's go ahead with the things how you should do it instead, right?
I just want to get the intros out of the way. So Adrian on your right on the screen is a strategic advisor and a strategic consultant, and I've learned a lot of things from him regarding how to be a proper Geschäftsführer when it comes to like strategically thinking about businesses, whether you're a solopreneur or entrepreneur in a small to medium business. He has great insights in how to make your technology serve your business model, your business strategy. And if you don't have any of those components, how to reprioritize and get your stakeholders on board to have a few difficult conversations. So if you're looking for that kind of help, if you want Adrian as a sort of pay-as-you-go model, as having him on as your sidekick, so that even if you are a CTO, you would like to have another CTO sort of being your buddy and helping you out with important decisions. Because CTOs do get lonely. CTOs are the only people in a company that don't have peers. Everybody, they don't have any technical peers, they don't have any non-technical peers. It's just service all the way around. So it's a very difficult role. So that's Adrian's link. If you want to reach out to him.
You should be the type of entrepreneurial person if you are a CTO in that case. So you're not that much of an employee engineer type of person anymore, which is one of the big reasons why so many CTOs actually struggle in their position right now, because they see themselves actually as the engineering manager, but they are not. Yeah. And this is where we actually help with the CTO fellowship.
Yeah. So as a CTO, you should be working on the box, not in the box. So if you find yourself too busy to work, if you find yourself being too busy in the box, you might call Adrian. On the other hand, if you are a leader and you want to work hands-on and you are very tactical and you want to actually be very close to the thing that's being delivered and coded and tested, and product engineering is your middle name, and you enjoy working in the box while you're also every now and then zoom out and figure out what you can improve on your process, that's what I'm focusing on. And that's sort of where most of the data for today's discussion has been coming from. I also setting up a new offer. So I had like a secret bespoke offer only available for B2B for companies as like for enterprises, please call me and then I price you. I'm opening that up a little bit. So now that I'm a top mentor on MentorCruise, I've added a publicly available tier that was only available to companies before. So that if you're a company leader and you want one-on-one coaching for yourself in the context of your technical challenges, I have a high-ticket offer now available for a reasonable rate on MentorCruise now. So that's new. I'm gonna build a sexy landing page for it because I think it's worth sort of highlighting what's really going on. Anyway, that's for context. Let's start. I think we need to get the controversial bits out of the way. So back to the metrics. Let's start at the top. Do you have any favorites, or should we start at the top, Adrian?
At the top, it's your topic, so
top.
Let's go ahead.
Let me make this a little bit larger because I think let's get the starter metrics on the screen. So one of the first things that definitely stands out to me when I'm shadowing a team and working with a leader is their ratio between ticket creators and owners, right? So what percentage of tickets gets completed by the person who created the ticket? This is a very important metric because it'll immediately tell you whether you're in a push or in a pull work culture. Right, so if it's constantly being created by one person, and then it's being assigned to a team member, then you're in a push culture, and the ticket creator to owner ratio will be 0. If that ratio is 0, that means that the person who creates tickets is never the person working on them. Right, so that is a full-on cost center sort of traditional IT department mentality of I have an issue, I want you to solve this issue, so I will document my issue and I will assign it to you.
This is basically I have that, I see that quite often, and in some areas still experience it myself, and this is the low ownership area, to be honest. It is where people basically pull a ticket because it was created for them and then start to work on that. In that moment that people try to take ownership as good as possible, but only to the degree of the ticket. So it is not in the context of the actual overall mission, goal, or product. So no one is really thinking of, hey, how can I improve the process when I'm doing the ticket? Or is there anything in follow-up which I need to test or create maybe another ticket? because I want, after this change something different because it might have affected that one, and I want to improve that as well. If you are, let's say, just measured by the topic itself, a ticket itself, you probably won't do that. And this is actually a bad thing. Yeah. So I don't even like it very much if a person creates the ticket for the developers. It's always better if you have conversations where the product owners, the actual people who would in the old way create those tickets, talk to you, and you create those tickets for yourself. Next step is oftentimes create a test plan and take this test plan as an agreement that is actually understood, and then go ahead. This is what I prefer as a way to work. And I see when I show that to clients and to partners and to other people, they tend to like that after they've seen that, but it is hard to understand. So there is a leap necessary.
It is unintuitive because you've never seen it done. The reason I brought it up today is because I see predominantly, I never see this measured. It is a very easy thing to measure. And I very rarely see people measure it. Because this is the first thing I ask them, like who creates the tickets? Oh, the product owner. Okay. And who closes the tickets? Well, the person it was assigned to. Okay. So it's 0 creator to owner ratio. Why is this a bad thing? It's a bad thing because okay. Caveat, let's assume your team is using JIRA or an equivalent tool to just make conversation today easier. I think it is predominantly the most popular tool out there for project management, or at least for this kind of software ticketing, or an equivalent, or one of JIRA's competitors, which basically looks like JIRA. What do engineers do when your ticket creator to owner ratio is low? They open up JIRA and they apply a filter. It says, only show me my tickets. And what happens? They immediately create a silo for themselves where they're only focused on what they're working on. And as a consequence, they have no idea of what everybody else on the team is working on.
No. I would even narrow it down. They are only focused on what they are supposed to do from another person. Not even better. They haven't decided to work on those tickets by themselves. Yeah.
Yes, and they might even have ideas of what they should be working on from their own perspective, but they don't start working on it because they don't have a ticket for it that was assigned to them. Exactly. And then they basically, the important things that don't get done that are their responsibility, they subconsciously end up projecting towards whomever is usually the ticket creator. The solution to this is simple. Create incentives for your engineers to create their own tickets. And if you, the leader, are the person creating the tickets, stop creating tickets. Which brings me to point number 2.
That I want to add something. Go ahead. There is this idea of transformational leadership. People like Dan Martell are actually teaching those. And it's actually an interesting thing which works, which the idea is that you go and instead of telling what to do, which is the ticket done by another person, telling you to do something specifically.
Talk about outcomes.
You talk about outcomes and results. So a result could be make sure even it could be, let's say, changing the entire behavior. Instead of creating a ticket, you expect that the feature or a change or a fix or something you have just discussed in a short one-on-one call, or in a team call, whatever type of call, and you see that this is an agreement of the team and there is an expectation of an outcome and result. And it's your job to define which tickets you need to create in order to get this done. Because in that moment, you have this time to actually say, hey, I need to update my tests for this. I need to test another thing. And I need to make sure that this is actually working. But this is not starting with the engineer. This is actually starting with the management. And so especially entrepreneurial types in the management area need to think about that, because this is about money. You need to start to trust into your developers and develop your developers developers, I like that term quite a lot, in order to get it, in order to get this trust and to believe that your people are actually doing what they are supposed to do. Because if you have never tried it, there's a big chance you don't trust them. And if you don't trust them, this is a barrier and a hurdle you need to overcome, but you don't do it because people or humans have resistance.
They won't feel like you don't trust them. You don't trust them. Like it's not it's not an illusion of a thing that's not going on. It's actually going on. Like you don't trust is something you build by trusting them, right? So if you're gatekeeping trust, then trust will never be established. So you will have to continue gatekeeping the consequences of a low trust environment, and that's stressful. That's where the stress comes from.
Yeah. So what I just wanted to add is transformational leadership here is an important cultural and soft skill which you should have in place from top down in order to get this specific metric to a better point. Right. Good. Let's go ahead.
To give an example on that, don't assign the solution, right? So don't create tickets that says, I have a problem, I need this thing implemented. Can you take care of that? Right? So because that's the problem is I need this implemented, it's not implemented right now. I need this coded, it's not coded right now. Can you solve that problem for me? That's selling the solution that you came up with. Right? It's much better to separate out, I have a problem, right? We want to increase, solution is add PayPal to checkout. But the problem is we want to increase conversion rates on our e-commerce platform. We want to get from 2% to 2.5. We think PayPal will help us get there. Right? Yeah. So the problem, the challenge, the outcome, the challenge is conversions are lower than we would like. Outcome, get to 2.5. That's the long-term outcome. Short-term outcome, we think right now PayPal is the best sort of low-hanging fruit of how to get there. And if that doesn't turn out to be the case, then we'll try something else. Right? So those mid-term decisions are what the team is doing. You're just there communicating the outcome because there's no guarantee that PayPal will actually get you there. Maybe what you need is integration with Apple Pay. Maybe you missed the mark. Maybe your audience isn't as tech savvy, and they would rather have a mobile phone, a frictionless mobile payment rather than a frictionless desktop payment solution. Okay. Second thing, and this is the most controversial one. And you know what happens when I do this? I'm just gonna say it. Your backlog has no business being full in JIRA. No business. If your backlog has more than 0 tickets at the beginning of the sprint, there's a problem. There's a systemic problem. And I always tell them, export your backlog. Like, don't delete it, obviously.
So you say Scrum is a systematic problem?
We're not there yet. This is starter metrics. At this point, I don't care if you're doing Scrum. If you're doing Scrum, I'll do Scrum with you. I mean, we're doing it by the freaking book, but I'll do it with you. I'm not a big Scrum fan, but there's a lot of things that we can still do well and follow Scrum. The issue is, what's the issue with the backlog?
Maybe can you quickly define exactly what you mean by backlog?
Let me just draw it up, huh? This is your JIRA. This is your JIRA. There's a box, and it has tickets. That's your currently active sprint. Let's assume you are doing Scrum. And then right next to it is your backlog. And it's also full of stuff. And it's not empty.
What is inside the backlog? This is the more precise question.
Tickets that you don't have time for right now, but you think you'll do them next once you finish with this sprint. or ideas, wish lists, work that somebody has put in JIRA, the project management software, or the feature request software, or however your other departments think about this tool. And it ended up being this ever-growing repository of stuff that could potentially get done.
So in my opinion, I would like to add that there are actually, in most companies I saw so far, two backlogs. One is the initial backlog of not started yet stuff.
Oof.
And the other one is the review backlog, which is oftentimes larger than the first one. What I in general, what I like to have is a backlog. So in my opinion, you need a backlog. It's very hard to work without one, but it should be a little bit like in continuous or in chunk-based development, the idea of a short-lived backlog, which means that the backlog is just if you work on something and you know that that's actually something you know during, for example, your work, or you have just discussed something and you don't want to do a context switch, you know what you, for example, do immediately after this task as a follow-up thing.
And that is a great usage for the backlog.
Exactly. So just very short-term things, but it should be shorter in an ideal world, shorter than the other columns actually are right now. Well, so if you have so many backlog items in your team right now, it means that you cannot really predict what is the outcome of the week anymore.
Exactly. There is a risk. There are some risk management metrics that we'll be looking at, and those are exactly that. They are related to the backlog, but as signals, not as planning tools. So the backlog is something that somebody else is maintaining as an idea log. And please, for the love of God, JIRA just released this idea board. Just use the freaking idea board, please. Like if you have a Scrum, if you're using the Agile tool, if you're using the Kanban board, if you're using the Scrum board, if you're using the whatever DSDM board, keep your backlog empty. Like ideas of this is the entire project should not be in the team's backlog. Just to be fair, this is you're a team lead, you're an engineering lead, you're overseeing one or many teams, and this is what the team needs to look at. Keep the red box empty, right? So one of the metrics is backlog size. You want to get to 0 on the backlog that the team sees. Now, why is that? This is controversial, but every time I do this with a coaching client, they're like resistant as heck. They're like, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. And I'm not saying delete them. Just export them somewhere else. If this is for senior management to make senior management decisions, create a separate board for senior management and just have them discuss ideas there. If this is to separate out, budgeting for your CFO, have a separate board for that. Have a Notion board for that. Have an Excel spreadsheet for that. Have your favorite Gantt chart software for that. But get it out of JIRA. JIRA and the team's backlog is only for items that are actively being worked on or actively being considered for work. If it's not going to happen in the next few hours or the next few days, get it out of your immediate sight. Get these kinds of fake backlogs down to 0. At the beginning of the sprint, at the beginning of, if you're doing continuous delivery, then that's the beginning of the day. At the beginning of the day, make sure this is 0. If you're scrumming, at the beginning of the sprint, make sure this is 0. Make sure the backlog that the team is seeing is empty. They should be having conversations about what you've learned, not about, there's a ticket for that. What does this ticket mean? Usually tickets in the backlog are like, they have a title and maybe some context and that's it. But nobody knows how to start work on it. That kind of documentation is useless and it's a huge waste of time. And I see a lot of meetings happening where somebody is grooming some kind of backlog and nobody knows how to make a ticket actionable. You assign it to somebody, the team owns it, the team pulls it, and they have no idea how to start work on it. They have no idea who to go to talk to. They have no idea whether it's actually a priority. So get it out of their sight. The third thing that is worth measuring is concurrency, and particularly concurrency per person. So you want to figure out...
There are two things. I don't know if you cover them in the next things, but the one thing is the idea of how many tasks does your team have, and how many tasks are you actually working on at the same time. And so maybe a third thing is when you have finished the task and you need to wait for a review because a person needs to do something and it's not there, is the task actually finished, or do you start the next one already?
So let's start with that one first, right? So if your team is not practicing continuous delivery, then you need some kind of definition of done, right? So you don't need a definition of done if you're practicing continuous delivery, because obviously it's delivered and done if you're practicing continuous delivery, right? That's down here with the high performers or with the mid performers, right? So you're focusing on continuous delivery primarily. We're not there right now. So let's assume you're not doing continuous delivery and you have a good reason for that. One of the issues that props up is that if work is not being delivered as it's being finished, it's probably stuck in some kind of process hell. Maybe it's waiting for review. Maybe it's waiting for merge. Maybe it's waiting for, I don't know, pull request rituals. Maybe it's waiting for another person to add something to it. You know, the front-end person and the back-end person are working asynchronously and on two tasks at the same time, right? So it's stuck in some kind of process hell. Like the team is not a team, and the process does not allow one ticket to go out from start to finish without interruption, right? So that's the first metric. Can a ticket go out from start to finish without interruption? If it can, it's a very high quality metric. It's a very high quality value for the metric. If the ticket has to stop and then be taken over by somebody else, that is a sign of high concurrency per person. Because what do? When my ticket stops, I start working on something else. Now I have one thing that is unfinished and another thing that is also unfinished. The second thing I'm actively working on. The first thing I'm not actively working on. The person I'm waiting on is the other way around. Yeah. They're not actively working on the thing that is finished. They are actively working on the thing that for them is unfinished right now. And then when they're finished, they might start working on my finished thing that needs them rather than starting on something else that they have in the backlog. And when they're done, then we need to synchronize and figure out, now that we've synced up together, is it actually done, or what is the next step towards, our ritual of done? And that's where this sort of concurrency and parallelism problems kick in. And in sort of chaotic environments, or I dare say dysfunctional team dynamics, this concurrency per person is the number one factor to slowing teams down. You would be surprised how much you can slow a team down, because you think, oh, maybe it's 1 or 0. No. The more I crank up concurrency, right, the more I'm dividing one person's attention. I can dilute. You can have 3 engineers, and I can dilute their attention down by a factor of 1,000. And we can continue, right? And maybe you're working at 1% of their overall throughput or their overall talent. And I can make that worse. I can get that from 1% to 0.5%. I can get that from 0.5% to 0.1%. And they'll work 1,000 times slower than their potential. And this has no end. You can continue diluting their ability to deliver ad infinitum if you don't take concurrency per person seriously. And usually this happens when there's multiple managers involved and it's not quite clear who's in charge, and there's a team of 5 and they're working on 3 things at the same time, and there's some specialists in there, and then one specialist needs to be on 2 things, and then another usually backend engineers, architects, DBAs, DevOps, SREs, and like full stack developers. They then do this like weird Gantt chart resource optimization of who works on what in what order when. And with 5-6 people like that, it's already a huge problem, right? So measure this. How do you measure this? You check out what's being worked on, and ideally it's one team. Ideally you have one JIRA board per team, and ideally a team of 5 is working on one thing at the same time. That's great, right? So you want the concurrency per person to be very low. Right? So you want, 5 people working on one thing together. That's a great metric. Now, sometimes 2 people of those 5 are not actively necessary on that activity. Then you can have them work on a second thing. Still good. 5 people involved, 2 people are working on one thing, 3 people are working on another thing. That's also still good, right? That you have a team of 5, they're working on 2 things.
It is more about do not overburden a single person or a team with too many things at the same time. So as long as you can concentrate on something,
exactly.
or then so easy spoken now. So you need to be able to focus.
What's important to figure out is that if the splitting happens, right? What you want to figure out, and this concurrency per person, what you want to figure out is you never want the concurrency per person to reach 1, right? Because that means that there's a team of 5, and there's somebody working solo on that team, right? So you never want to have a task where it's like, okay, this is Dennis's task, only Dennis can work on it, and Dennis is working on it alone right now, and Dennis will do everything alone. Now, that's great in a high-performing team if there's so much automation coverage that I can do that, and I'm being entrusted to work like that. It's still not a very good thing long-term, but short-term in emergencies, it can happen. But in chaotic teams or even dysfunctional teams, if that is your default, or if you tend to go there often, then your team is not a team. Your team is a set of individuals that at the beginning of your work week or your sprint, whatever cadence you choose, they split up into solo teams and they go back to that, number 1 point, the ticket creator / owner ratio, right? So they're being assigned stuff. Yes, it's being assigned to the team, but then individuals split up and take something from the pie. The problem is the team has a commitment. Individuals don't have commitments, right? I can't say, I will make sure we make the deadline. Well, because you can't do it alone, but you also can't be irresponsible alone. But if you're then planning your work to be solo, or you're incentivizing high flow, low collaboration environments, then that team doesn't know how. That team doesn't have any experience rowing the boat in the same direction. This is usually dominant in teams that have no pairing culture, that have no ensembling culture, mob programming culture, where most meetings are non-working meetings. And concurrency per person, I found, is a great measure. If it's 1 for any one person, so how do you measure this? You measure how many people are actively working on each task, and you also measure how many tasks is each person working on. If there's a task that has only one person, or one person that's only working on one task and nobody else, that's a 1 on the concurrency, right? So I split them apart. It is concurrency, it is parallelism, and it is number of value streams. If any of your value streams goes to 1, that means that the team has split up and somebody's working solo on something that might not be aligned with the team's priorities.
My brain is jumping between 2 scenarios all the time. Those I know is single tasks for a single person. They can occur quite often. A concurrency doesn't make sense there, for example. But sometimes you have larger tasks, which I don't like. There you need more people, and then you can make smaller tasks out of that, which I prefer then. And there it does make sense to create batches of tasks. So, for example, you have a task creating feature A, and feature A is actually 3 tasks, and you have a team of 5, and everyone in this team is working on only one of those tasks, maybe 2 are working on that one, 2 on that one, and single person on that one. Maybe it's the infrastructure
And that's
person.
fine.
Yeah, that's
That's
fine because
fine
it is bundled
because
together as one context.
exactly, because all of the tasks are serving the same value stream.
Yeah.
Right, so it's important, right? So if there was one giant task that has been assigned to the team, that the team has pulled and said, we, the team, will work on this, and in order to deliver this, we need to do these 20 things, that's okay to parallelize. That's okay to then say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. That's fine. That is the team rowing in the same direction, and then everybody has a role to play. That's fine. What's not fine is when there's 5 different tasks, and rather than the team tackling each task one at a time together, they all start to parallelize and do 20% of each task in parallel. Right? So when it's not following the same value stream, that's when it's a problem. But I'm very grateful that you've highlighted that distinction. The second metric, now we're going into the more subjective areas, is doing a waste walk.
Define that, please.
A waste walk is a combination of value stream mapping and lean project management. So what you want to do is it's like you're throwing a problem into the pipeline, and then you're walking with the problem. Right? So let's say you have a task. Add PayPal to checkout. Or we wanna increase conversion rates, and the team decides we will add PayPal to checkout. Then you follow that task through, and then you measure 2 things. You measure actively on the calendar where you are with the task. Like, where are you? Like, how long does it actually on the calendar take? So you count everything: weekends, lunch breaks, how long it's sitting around. And the second metric is what is being worked on when somebody is actively involved with it, right? So an example would be, we're having a planning session. Okay, you count 1 hour. After the planning session, it takes 5 hours for somebody to pick it up and start working on it. So you would count active value, 1 hour planning, and then you would also plan 5 hours, nothing happened, 5 hours wait time. And then somebody picks it up, and then you would go with them and walk with them. Okay, somebody's working on it. Now they've assigned it to somebody else. Okay, and then you would add the wait time again. So, okay, now what happens next? Right, so you're taking the perspective of one task, and if your tasks are never the same and chaotic, that's also a problem of its own. So try to find a sort of small, repeatable task. The Agile community calls this right sizing. Your tickets should all be sort of the right size. My partner is in the service business, but she's a beautician and a massage therapist, right? So for them, the right size of a ticket is doing one major body part per person, right? So if somebody wants their hair done, it's hair, one person. Okay, that's a 45-minute slot, or that's a 30-minute slot. If somebody wants hair and nails and feet, that's probably 1 hour and a half to 2 hours, right? So they know it. Their industry has determined the right size, and the right size is one person and then major procedures. It's never going to be exact to the minute, but it's a very good size predictor. And you want that same cadence in a tech project, right? So the right size, once you're doing continuous delivery, right sizing for your product leadership mentality would be anything that the team can start working on and deliver between start of work and lunch and end of day, right? Those would be the right size. So that would be 2 tasks per day. And if the team is collaborating together on each task, that is then the right size for those kinds of activities. And then those you can then split down into sub-activities if necessary. But if they're the right size, the documentation overhead usually exceeds any kind of pragmatic use from having more tickets in JIRA.
But this is, as you said in the beginning, this is very subjective because what the actual right size is, first of all, of course, is depending on the let's say, environment and circumstances you
The
work on.
maturity and the engineering culture predominantly. Is
How
it stable? Is it
effective
predictable?
do you have a person with 24 years of experience in that
what is the
field?
skill gap? How much
Right.
mentoring is there going on? How much knowledge sharing, right? So
Yeah.
is it like a homogeneous sort of, everybody's different, but everybody's helping each other stay on the same level? Or are the superstars working very differently from the juniors, right?
And separated.
And separated, yeah. So
So I
that's why
have
this
this.
is
I'm
subjective.
writing. I'm writing probably again the larger one about the average developer, because this is one of the most favorite topics in the fellowship I do. And the average. The idea is this is an engineering idea, that the top engineers in your team are actually the main goal of them is to reduce the complexity down to a level that everyone is able to work on that. And everyone is the average developer, which means in parts the junior developer, but at most the intermediate person who's actually doing the bulk work. And not the senior persons. The senior persons have more the mentor and cornerstone roles.
Absolutely.
And if you have that in place, the good thing is, let's say work is very shareable. There is a lot of knowledge share in that. And you have the tendency to have very small batch sizes you work on. And very small batch sizes in a very understandable system means you can even say, okay, I just have half an hour even to work on something, to fix something, push commit it, and go to the next one. And those context switches are actually okay if you have the feeling that you have finished something. But this is only possible if you have the environment where this is possible, because otherwise,
continuous delivery. Or
exactly, it must be.
integration.
There must be a possible definition of done for just for this
So
30 minutes of
as
work.
I said before, if you are following continuous delivery, you don't need a definition of done, because your business is operating on a much more concrete version of itself. If your delivery procedures are synthetic, if there's a virtual done staging environment where we say these things are done, these things are not done, these things are almost done. If you're in that virtual space and you're not practicing continuous delivery, then you need a definition of done. But needing a definition of done like that is an empty pattern. It is a dysfunction, right? So your goal should be striving towards continuous delivery, so that people don't have to
maybe we're talking about different things. What I mean is, if you start a task for 30 minutes and you want to be finished with that task, on some point you need to be able to define it as done.
Yes.
What I mean by that, it should not be still open and you push it.
That's the next one. Yeah. So
this is what I mean by DoD in that moment, right?
Yeah,
it is not a DoD predefined from someone else. This is not what I mean.
So let's connect the dots together, right? So what we're discussing on the waste walk is, the DORA metrics and the lean metrics call this cycle time, essentially, right? So what is the active time being worked on a unit of delivery, right? So I need to add a feature. Everybody in the team is touching it in some way at some point, measuring active parts. And then you measure how much it actually took on the calendar. And then if you compare those two numbers, you will essentially get the amount of waste that's being produced. Right? So a weekend is a good example. And now I like to include weekends, right? I hate when something gets started on Friday, is committed unfinished, and then somebody has to pick it up on Monday. To me, that is a huge waste. I would,
it takes ages until you get back to the old context.
Yes, it's a huge waste, right? Because
and a potential error-prone system, because maybe you miss something, and then in the requirements you said, people are thinking it's implemented, but it's not.
Over the weekend, right? So the number of things that can influence your work priorities on Monday increases, and this connects back to the ticket create problem, to the backlog size problem, to the concurrency problem. I do count in weekends to the waste, but vacation as well. If I have something unfinished and I go on vacation and I come back, that thing is at a much higher waste level than if I had finished it and then gone on vacation. Right? So these waste walkers are important. You need to count in everything. And then you need to figure out what is your waste to productivity ratio on the process, not on the person. You put one ticket, it goes through the team's pipeline, and you just analyze the team's pipeline. This is not about measuring the individual performance of each stage. That is a huge waste of time. Because the moment people know that they're being gamed, they will not want to participate in waste walks because they will want to make their stage look pretty because they will feel judged, right? So the important part here is that to figure out what in our process is a problem. Oh, there's a stage here that sits around for 5 hours and then it needs 3 hours of merging and manual testing. Okay, let's test it on a feature in parallel next time. Is it faster if I parallelize something here with automated testing? Right, so that's one thing. You can also do a waste walk on your CI/CD pipeline. There's a really good video. Oh, yes, you're typing to me on private chat. You need to go, right? Yeah, you need to go in 5 minutes.
Yeah, actually 2 now.
So there's a really good video.
I would be interested in finding wastes in analysis tooling, like even static code analysis, which takes a look at, hey, you commit maybe to different things or something like that. That's actually something I never saw actively or perceived actively like that. But that could actually help to measure how many people work on the very same thing. Or should work on in the same context. That could help to improve
what you can
productivity.
What you can use is, first of all, you can do waste elimination in different ways. I just linked a video from DevOps. It's a fresh video. It has, I think it's from, when was it posted?
It's actually not possible to click on it for me.
It was posted yesterday. It's from DevOps UK. It has like 50 views right now. So he speaks about, this is Daniel Raniz Rainland. He speaks about finding waste in your pipelines. So he had a great example. Don't run your entire pipeline all the time. Don't run your unit tests in a pipeline that has integration tests if the unit tests have already ran and the integration tests will fail. It's a great video. It's basically lean process applied to your pipeline automation and how to make it give you feedback faster. That's the most important thing. Now, the second thing you talked about, I don't know, should we take a break and you take over now for a few minutes? And
it won't. It will take more than a few minutes. So I'm not sure if that is it.
Are you coming back till end of stream, or are you gonna have a full hour meeting?
I can't tell. It is set to full hour. So
then let's assume you're not going to be here, and if you have any final.
I will return if possible, of course.
Okay.
Because it's an interesting topic. Like to talk on that one, especially the last things. The more subjective it gets, the more interested it is actually for me, because I often see that the subjective matters or reasons are often very connected to the mindsets and the ownership things. Absolutely. And it is one thing to measure something, and it's one thing to take that serious. Mm-hmm. And that's actually something. For example, investment in mentoring. As I said already, in the average developer, the senior is actually the mentor, making sure that everything is working. That is so important, and that could even be a own stream. We could do. It's that important. Yeah, exactly. I actually need to go. Sorry for that. Okay. I will jump in later if possible. Great show so far, and looking forward for the replay then on your Substack.
Awesome.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Okay, let's take a drink. Don't forget to hydrate. We're at the 1 hour minute mark. So as a reminder, you can find Adrian on this link. He does fellowships. So he does a program called Fellowships, where he basically helps a CTO or a non-technical founder to sort of improve their strategic presence in their company, to align their technology goals with their business strategy. And this is what you were discussing right now. This is what I usually run through. It's one of our growth objectives with most of my one-on-one coaching clients. And if you're interested in this kind of this topic, but with customized intensive coaching catered to your needs, working with you directly on your challenges, your quarterly goals, your immediate high stakes critical project, you can find me on the link below to discuss options of one-on-one coaching. Okay, let's continue. So the waste walk is focusing on the idea of what in the pipeline encourages, enables, or causes implicitly waste, right? So it's not to say that people malignantly want to waste time, but maybe there's something in the process where, oh, it has to be reviewed by 2 people. Now, okay, I create a pull request and I put it in Bitbucket, and now I wait for 2 people. That is the process encouraging, incentivizing waste, right? If you don't do a waste walk, maybe you don't know that that's happening, because, you know, the daily stand-up in Scrum about what did you do yesterday, I mean, that's such a huge waste of time, because it doesn't show you the waste that's being produced. It's just talking about the problems that people encountered. You know, it's like, hey, nobody answered my pull request review. That's not a waste. That's a complaint. The waste is that, hey, if I stopped working on something and it's not deployed and it's been sitting around for 3 hours and it's my fault. That's the waste. There's something in the process incentivizing waste. That should be discussed actively. And you as a leader, you can take matters in your own hands and you can just measure where these problems are, even if your engineers cannot spot them, right? So you can just come in with a high quality thing to look for. Say, okay, I want more collaboration. I still want a little bit of flow and a lot of mentoring, but I want to completely eliminate waste on, let's say, the process and the pipeline. So that's a waste walk. Now, another thing that Adrian talked about is work in progress counter, WIP in this case being work in progress. So that's a very much Kanban term, a Kanban concept. So this comes into Little's law. Little's law, that's queue theory, right? So there's 7 things going out. Consumption rate from the queue is 7 per second. If 7 things are going in every second and 7 things are coming out every second, then that queue is stagnating. If I now add a backlog item to that queue, it'll always be at 8. 7 things come in, 7 things go out, 1 is constantly there. So if that's your drain rate of the queue and you add things to the backlog, right, so that every now and then there's an extra little push, like very small, like it becomes 7.01 instead of 7, that queue will always grow and it'll never drain, right? So that's how you get to your freaking non-zero backlogs in the first place. And the reason for that is that your WIP counter might be very high. So the very first thing to measure, now if you're working remotely in like 7 different time zones, this might be a little bit harder in practice. But generally, you know, at the end of the day, there should be 0 work in progress. It's an oversimplification, but that is a very good North Star target to have. It's like at the end of the day, when people leave their computers to go enjoy time with their families, they should have been able to commit whatever they had done in a state that is safe to deploy, or at least safe to run through the pipeline, safe to merge into mainline, and to have it in the mainline code base and potentially even deployed without it breaking things. Even if it's unfinished, if it's feature flag, no problem, right? So that if they get hit by a bus tomorrow, it's not on some like weird only on my machine, or it's not in a branch, or it's not in some weird 3-step ritual of it's not quite done yet. It's kind of coded done, but not tested, but I need to test cover it, or I need to test it, or I need to run it on staging. So that there isn't any like work in progress stuff lingering around when people leave their computers. So one of the things you can measure is at the end of the day, how much stuff is in like a limbo state. You know, is anybody on a feature branch that didn't get merged? Is there any features that are in progress? Right. So you can also look at it from JIRA's perspective. If your team has a very strong culture of documenting what they're working on, ideally there should be no in progress tickets at the end of the day. Or maybe even if you're at a very high speed cadence, again, this falls a little bit apart once your time zones and the organization grows, beyond like 1,000 people. and your engineering department, so your scope for engineering department is 10 teams, not one team, it's a little bit harder because there's a lot of noise. But for a team of 5, 10, 15 people, it's very easy to say, look, no in-progress stuff during lunch. Like finish and do a deployment before lunch, or do a deployment before end of day, or do a deployment after lunch. And then there should be no in-progress stuff in JIRA. Ideally, you should be then having a meeting and figuring out what the next priority is and then create tickets. Right? So measuring that work in progress counter, if it's 0, if it does get to 0 at key moments in the day, that's great. If it only gets to 0 during like weird ritualistic breakpoints, like if you're doing Scrum at the end of the sprint, even if things did not get finished, you artificially, synthetically yoink them out of the sprint, put them back in the backlog, move them from in progress to do, and then you artificially restart the cycle. If that is the only time where your work in progress gets to 0, that's a problem, right? So you want to measure how often you're in that state, or rather, do you get into that state of 0 work in progress regularly? Now, you'll encounter the best results at your lowest level of concurrency. Now, that's, again, with the concurrency per person metric, that's going to be difficult if everybody's working solo on something. Because the moment they're stopped working, now they need to pull or be assigned something else. And maybe that is so chatty and so time consuming that you've optimized that through one of the weekly rituals. People love doing that during sprint plannings. That's not what sprint plannings are for, right? So 5 people are need to work on something. Everybody's individually being planned. So the time it takes to plan stuff is so time consuming that you just plan it in advance and say, we'll plan your stuff on Mondays. Every Monday we meet on a large meeting and we'll plan your work for the week. And then even if you're not finished, you'll just say that I'm not finished and I need to continue on this, and then I'll work on X and Y after. That's a huge waste of time, because that is a sign that your team doesn't get stuff done and it has a huge work in progress counter, which means your planning accuracy is not anywhere near what your stakeholders would want. Having a work in progress counter be low means that you as the leader get to spend more time mentoring people and work on strategy rather than obsessively trying to hunt for deadlines. Leaders that have a high work in progress counter experience a lot of stress. That is why it's so high on this list. This is one of the first things I bring up with leaders who feel that they are just constantly busy. It's this high work in progress that keeps them in a high state of stress, because the moment they start a project, they just shower themselves with anxiety. Will I make the deadline? Will I make the quality bar? Will I make the budget? Will I get the scope right? How will I squeeze in that tech debt thing or the security thing while also making the budget and the deadline and everything else? Right? So it's just anxiety. And that comes from having a high whip counter. With leaders, with a combination of reducing backlog size, doing a waste walk to reduce the whip counter, what leaders experience is just this, you know what, I have more time now. Like, rather than obsessively trying to manage so that tasks get pushed, I'm available now, the leader says, to just answer somebody's call and explain why this architecture is this way, or why we decided to have this technology like this and not like that. They had an idea but didn't see the whole picture. I get to spend time with stakeholders discussing potential ideas of how we can optimize our revenue streams for the next product cycle. Right? So the moment they de-stress, they get to actually be strategic. And the stress comes from having a too full schedule, a too full calendar, because the whip counters and the backlog size are non-zero. So this is just vital life sign metrics. Typical stuff that we work on. And with most of my coaching clients, we see immediate results in like 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Stress just goes away. It's hard. Like they still resist. I know you guys. You still resist. You say like, I can't do that. I can't cancel a sprint. No way. No, I can't delete tickets from JIRA. No, I can't move it out. But we push through. We find a way. We always find a way. And then they're just like a completely different person. So that's one area. That's whip counter. To me, I think that's where most of the anxiety gets created. And the team feels this. I can survey the team and I can tell their whip counter. I can survey how they feel, and I can guess what their whip counter is based on how they feel. The more anxious they are, the more under stress they are, the more they think that there's never enough time to refactor, the higher their whip counter is. And the whip counter might not even be high because of backlog items. It might be high because of defects from customer support. It might be high because of, I don't know, the analytics team, the data analytics team, the data analysis team, constantly asking them to create queries or create reports for them, or maybe the sales team requires some shiny new toy on a landing page. Wherever the whip thing originates from, it's causing people to parallelize more, to leave things unfinished, to interrupt work, to go work on something else, and then not finish that, and then come back. And then there's a triage upon triage upon triage, and a lot of non-working meetings. Right. Next thing. This is now counterintuitive, right? So we're looking now for metrics that we don't really want to optimize. We just want to use them as signals of immediate problems. So now it's starting to make sense why we discussed the backlog earlier. So one of the risk factors, one of the risk signals that you can use is when your backlog grows during an important increment being produced. So for example, your team is building a new feature. It's going to take 2-3 days. If the backlog grows while the team is working on that, that's because the team has found something. Right? So the team has found something that might be important to discuss. And at the beginning of the planned work week, this was unknown. So the team has actively, so the backlog growing because the team has put something into it, right? So the backlog was empty at the beginning of the sprint, and the team has put something into the backlog, something new, or maybe moved something that they said would finish, and they move it out, and they say we won't finish it. The backlog growing during a planned work cadence, again, if you're doing continuous delivery, measures are slightly different. But normal doing Scrum or just have like a weekly, bi-weekly, twice every 2 weeks cadence, this is a huge signal that something risky is happening. We are learning something, and the things we are learning as a team are signaling that there's something unexpected happening. There's something unexpected about to happen in the future. Because if you want to be on time and on budget, you have to be on time and on budget every day. So if you're putting things into the backlog, that means that you are uncovering unknowns, which means that maybe if you put it in the backlog, that means that today you're on time, but maybe the scope of the entire project cannot be delivered fully and still be on time. So somebody needs to do something. So that is a signal that a decision has to be made, and better sooner rather than later. In that same context, another risk factor is work in progress increase. So the backlog being empty is a precondition for being able to use backlog growth as a signal. Having low work in progress is a precondition to be able to use work in progress increases as a risk factor. Right? So that's why we're tackling them in this order. Because if you've minimized work in progress, right, and that can be the amount of unmerged feature branches, or the amount of open tickets right now, or the amount of things that are done that are not deployed. They might be waiting and staging for, I don't know, blocked in QA, or it went through QA and there's a ton of bugs and it went back. So whenever the work in progress increases, spikes during a work week or work day, that is an immediate signal that something's not meeting quality requirements, or we have encountered unknowns and decided to tackle them immediately, right? So this is a sister metric with the backlog growth. If the team has decided not to put it in the backlog, which is the responsible thing to do, but instead to immediately tackle it, that means that whatever they decided to take on is an emergency, which means that this is a downstream consequence of a bad decision having happened a while ago, last month, last week, last year. And now they have to urgently deal with it, which means that whatever they were working on is also on standby. Usually, incidents in production are a work in progress spike for a team, for a squad, sometimes for an individual. If you have the concurrency issue, you might rely on your superstars, and we'll get to the bus factor and the superstar factor soon. But a spike in work in progress increase is by far the most actionable signal metric that you can use as a leader to immediately get back control and signal that, hey, something requires my attention, right? So what you should be doing is, rather than asking your team for status updates and what did you work on yesterday, blah, 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 blah. It's a huge waste of time, because you're pulling information. That's, again, coming back from the product to project mentality. A project mentality is pulling information, is pulling reports, it's pushing order and assigning tasks, right? So you have no idea what's going on, and you're pulling to figure out what to tell them to do. That's the wrong way around. But what you want to do is you want to pull what was the result of this decision. You want to pull what did we deploy yesterday? What was the consequence of deploying yesterday? What was the consequence of not deploying yesterday? We need to do A, B, and C. Well, I don't want to estimate how long A takes. I don't want to estimate how long B takes. I don't want to estimate how long C takes. What I want is I want the team to figure out, if we're doing A, B, and C, what is the consequence of doing B first? What is the consequence of doing C first? Well, the other ones are waiting. This is just cost of delay divided by duration, CD3, if you're familiar with that. It's top of mind for me because I had a conversation with this with one of my clients yesterday. Right, so you want to be able to talk about outcomes and respond to opportunities. It's like, what opportunities were presented to us yesterday? What opportunities are presenting itself? What challenges are bubbling up as we're continuing work on this? And you want to push improvements. How can I help you? How can I make this easier? Like, do you need help? Do you need more budget? Do you need more team members? And then empower your team so that your authority that you as the leader are carrying, you go closer to the problem. So you don't pull information about the problem, but you just go and share your influence and share your authority and share your sort of empowered state and go wherever the issue is, right? So if there's a team that needs help, go and pair with them, have a working meeting with them and see if your presence can make the situation better. Maybe you're the product owner. Maybe you're the only person that understands the business strategy behind the product. And it would help if a squad or a pair that is stuck could help from you passively being involved and the ensembling or mob programming with them, actively giving them insights as they are coding up and dealing with a complex subsystem. Right? So bring your authority, bring your influence to where it's needed, and try to delegate your power. Try to delegate your authority so that they can do it instead of you. So rather than pulling information so that you can press a button, that you can create something where you can empower them to press the button. But first you need to go there and check, okay, is what they need the button right now? And you can only make these kinds of high-level strategic decisions with people you actively collaborate with. If as a leader, you don't actively collaborate with your team members, then you have no idea what they need. And again, you will need to pull information from them, pull reports from them, like try to squeeze out like sensitive or just vulnerable information from them in like one-on-ones and safe environments. And that can be very difficult if your work environment not only if it's dysfunctional, but if it also lacks psychological safety, right? So that's going to be like getting the right kind of information from that kind of environment is going to be a huge challenge. It's going to be an uphill battle. It's much easier to just make yourself part of the team that is working on creating solutions. But we were talking about the WIP increase, right? So there's a risk factor involved that you can just look at when work in progress balloons. You know, somebody is from yesterday to today, somebody has created 7 feature branches and nothing is merged, and there's an octopus merge waiting to happen at end of week. That is an immediate signal that something needs to happen. Again, if you want to be on time, you got to be on time every day. Somebody having to deal with an octopus merge, a risk of an octopus merge, is already off course. Like whatever your plan was, you're already off course. It's worth addressing today. You can use these signals then to figure out who you need to talk to, who you might need to pull work from so that they're more available to mentor them. Usually this is a sort of specialist or a junior having like a complexity overload, like whatever whatever work they've chosen for themselves turned out to be much more complex than they can handle, or they were counting on somebody's support, but they got held up or got sick or on vacation, etc., etc. This idea of going on vacation and being held up is also part of the bus factor. So try to visualize how your team members are communicating. And you know, as a leader, as an engineering manager, you don't really want to engineer. You don't want to manage what the engineers are working on. That can quickly get out of hand in various forms: micromanagement, being too controlling, being too bossy, being too hands-on or too hands-off. Ivory tower architect mentality can quickly kick in. So what you want to do is actually try to visualize who's communicating with whom regularly, right? So draw your team members and whoever is immediately adjacent to the team and just pull lines between the most chatty collaborators and see if you can manage the communication flows to be more frictionless. Maybe there's interdepartment communication going on, or maybe 2 people are constantly communicating through a third person. Maybe that's a team that needs to be formed or reshaped, or maybe 2 team members are needing to actively collaborate, but they are part of 2 different teams and they have different value streams, but they happen to be collaborating temporarily. This is, again, value stream mapping, team topologies, a little bit of Wardley mapping. If you also have like a clash in priorities of there is something that we're doing that is commodity, like a forgot password functionality or unsubscribe from a newsletter, and then there's like innovation. There's something unique to our software, and one of our team members is working on commodity stuff, and one of our team members is working on innovative stuff. And they need to work together, but they're just on completely different like mental models because of how their teams are structured. Because maybe the team is not feature complete, not skill complete. So one of the specialists is needed to do something important architecture, or to improve the automation pipeline, or to deploy the damn thing, or to provision a new database. So try to figure out where your main bus factors are by drawing your communication flows, and just manage the communication flows. Try to figure out who's chatting with whom. That results in a bottleneck. Usually those are dead ends in this graph. And then try to bring people together in such a way that each bus factor is being alleviated with active collaboration with another person. For example, you're the leader, you have a team of 10. The team naturally congregates around 2 strong informal tech leads. It might be the 2 most senior people, not necessarily. And then there's 1 or 2 juniors that are dead ends that only work with 1 leader. Now, if the juniors are not responsible for their own work and the leaders get busy, then you might end up with a high bus factor on the juniors, right? So in absence of, if the leaders end up being too busy, they might start neglecting they might start neglecting the other team members who relied on their collaboration, who relied on communicating with them to get things done. And when that happens, again, you notice a WIP increase, or you notice backlog growth, because the juniors get stuck in a dead end, and the person they need, their mentor, their buddy, or their manager, suddenly becomes unavailable because they are doing concurrency. They have a huge backlog to deal with, or they have a superstar factor to deal with. We'll get to that in a moment. All right, so try to manage this bus factor so that your team members collaborate as much as possible. And rather than managing what they're working on and how they're working on it, try to figure out, okay, who's working often with whom? How can we split this dynamic a little bit up? How can we get these two people who never work with these two people collaborating more? What product knowledge do they own? What product knowledge do they own? Well, are there any features where collaboration might make sense? You want to, as much as possible, create evidence of everybody on your team being able to pair and work together with everybody else on your team. If what you're experiencing is that you have a team of 10 people and the only evidence is that you have is that everybody is very good at working alone and nobody gets along pairing with anybody else, that is a huge risk factor. That is basically having 10 high bus factor individuals. The issue with that, following Conway's law, is that those people then create architectures where the architecture relies on them individually to function. That person leaves or gets hit by a bus or gets sick. Suddenly nobody else knows how to maintain that subsystem. Somebody might be familiar enough with it to sort of invest time to sort of get up to that speed, but that's another bus factor, right? So if I replace that one person with another person, I didn't make the bus factor go away. I just invested money into reintroducing the same bus factor. The inverse is also true. You might have a superstar factor. A superstar factor is there is this specialist who's very good at working, who's like the most experienced person, and there are tasks that automatically get assigned to them and always solved by them. Right? So this doesn't mean that nobody else on the team knows how to deal with it, but they are the person that always deals with payment. So all payment-related stuff, because it's high risk, immediately goes to them. Right? So if you have superstars like that sort of hog important domain-related work, what you want to do there is get that factor down by making sure that when they're working on the things that they're very good at, that they're never doing it alone. That every time they're doing the thing they're really good at, there's always somebody else in the room coding in their stead, and they're just driving the person. That's how you get the quickest knowledge sharing to alleviate this problem. Because the superstars, what happens is that even though the superstars might be very effective and might be creating tooling and documentation, so they don't really pose a bus factor threat. Of the superstar can leave, and because the critical, very important stuff is well documented and automation covered, there might not be any regressions if they leave. The problem is that if such work is constantly frequent, for example, having to maintain how accounting is done or how taxes are being done, if you have a high guarantee that things work, but you don't know how to make changes to that system, the superstar factor creates areas in your code base that can very quickly deteriorate if the superstar leaves. Now, that doesn't mean that there's a bus factor that nobody understands it. The problem is that the superstars, even if it's just two superstars working together constantly on one thing, they hog ownership, and it can create silos where it says nobody other than these two people or nobody other than this one person can touch this code base. And that will create architecture problems, that will create information silos. And it just makes everybody in the team sort of not want to work on that code base, because that code base will create its own culture, and it'll create this impression that, hey, that payment stuff, oh, that's Steve and Bob having to work on that. I would rather not touch that because it's created at such a high level of quality that I don't understand. If they were gone, everybody would sort of take over and make themselves home at that place. But because they have that superstar presence, they might alienate people from wanting to work with them on that subsystem, right? So that's the sort of more, you might know this under a different term. Sometimes this is your benevolent jerk. Sometimes this is your lone wolf. Sometimes this is your brilliant asshole, right? So there are different terms to highlight. Like, this is usually a very competitive high performer in your team that can share if necessary and usually has a very good relationship with their manager, but they're not a team player, right? So they might stick around for such a long time that the bus factor issue actually does get a little bit alleviated. But the issue is that they are learning so fast that the thing they do own, they forget and they then don't pass on. The best thing to do with your superstars is to have them mentor juniors, usually through pair programming. So junior types while the superstar navigates, with the incentive of helping the junior or mid-level get promoted or get more job satisfaction. That's the best thing, to get them from a high performer elite mindset to let's nurture your team, rather than there being one spike of skill from one specialist. Let's get the common denominator higher. Let's get everybody upskilled to the same level, rather than there being like a high difference in skill levels between the best performer and the lowest performer. Then there's working and non-working meetings. Now, the reason I put this more towards the bottom of the list with the more subjective things is because this is very hard to measure. First of all, your calendar is quite a weird ecosystem, because you can, at least in Google Calendar and Outlook Calendar, I can be invited to 7 overlapping meetings, and now it's difficult to count. Okay, is it like, if I'm invited to 2 meetings at 1 p.m., am I going to show up to both of them? Is that 2 hours of work in 1 hour? Is that 1 hour? Are we going to merge those meetings, move those meetings? People who have back-to-back meetings and they're constantly late to one of them, it's like, please finish your meetings 5 minutes before the next meeting. So there's a lot of different ways to measure how full your calendar is, which is why that's not the point. The point is whether you interrupt work to have a non-working meeting, or whether you get work done by calling a work meeting. So what's an example of a working meeting? An example of a working meeting is that I call a meeting with you for tomorrow for 15 minutes to do a pull request review. That's a working meeting. The output of that meeting is that the pull request will be dealt with. That's a working meeting. A working meeting might be that you and I have a calendar slot every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. to pair program. That's a working meeting. A working meeting is there's an emergency and we need to have a crisis whiteboard brainstorming session to quickly discuss an architecture change, because we were wrong about some of our assumptions and now we need to make a drastic change before launch. Those are all working meetings. Non-working meetings are, again, this stuff. When somebody is centralizing pulling information, right? So there's engineers and non-engineers, or a front-end engineer and a back-end engineer, and they're just pulling information from each other. When will this be? When will that be? Blah, blah, blah. There's not any active work being done. Instead, everybody's sort of syncing up together to help key decision makers make decisions with more data. But if this comes at a cost of getting work done, people usually just avoid these meetings, or they will put their headphones on, turn their camera off, and then work, be passive on the meeting and just code while they're listening in with one ear, because they're so busy. This, again, ties in very well with your concurrency problems and your whip counter. The more stressed you as the leader are, the more stressed your team is, the more ungrateful there will be for any kind of non-working meeting. A second aspect that's worth considering is the ratio between how many of those meetings are actually planned in advance. Great example in Scrum culture, or faux-agile, scrumfall, the more dysfunctional ways of doing Scrum, is when sprint planning sessions are back-to-back, week-to-week, without any gaps between sprints, and every sprint planning session is planned in advance to happen every Monday for 2 hours. That is definitely a high non-working meeting ratio compared to working meetings. Because ideally, a better way about it would be for the team to work together on a single problem, and after they have worked together on it, then have a short meeting to figure out, okay, are we right about our assumptions? Is this going the right way? What can we have deployed by end of day? Were we right about what we can get deployed at end of day? If not, then we're probably wrong about the deadline. How can we, what can we shift now to still to maintain planning accuracy for the next few days? Because that's really what's in front of them on a tactical level. You, on a strategic level, you just want to make sure that the project as a whole makes sense. So again, recording meetings, daily rituals, stand-up meetings, huge waste of time, right? They're all non-working meetings. If most of your meetings on the calendar for you as the leader and your team members, your reports, if the scheduled recurring stuff is mostly non-working meetings, that's a huge red flag. Try to get rid of them. Try to get rid of them. One of the things that nowadays I often do with leaders, especially the kind of leaders that host sprint planning or equivalent meetings, is I give them the advice of don't plan work, don't invite people to the sprint planning session who are busy, right? So when you think it's time for a sprint planning session, if that person has anything in progress, don't invite them. Just let them work on it. And just invite the people who are waiting for work and need the planning session. The meeting will be shorter. It will be a working meeting because you're just working together, focusing on one individual, 2-3 people out of 10. And then when you've decided what's next for them, you end the meeting, and the 2-hour meeting suddenly shrinks down into 15 minutes or 25. And then when those people who didn't get invited are done, then you do the same thing with them. Then you host an impromptu planning session with them, and you just keep doing this. And then if you had to have 7 sprint planning sessions in a week, well, that tells you what your concurrency per person is. That means that your team that you thought was 10 team members is actually 7 different teams. And then that will help you, bus factor, communication channels. That will then help you figure out, okay, if my 10 individuals are 7 different teams, how are these teams interfacing? Who talks to whom? When is there any waste in the process? You can do a waste walk. You can check if any of the whip counters are increasing whenever there's handoffs happening between one individual team and the other individual team. Is somebody on multiple teams at the same time? Did you invite one person to several of these meetings? Is somebody involved with multiple projects at the same time with different teams? That is also a sign that there might be a concurrency problem or a superstar factor problem, or maybe somebody's an ivory tower architect and they don't know it. Or they might have inappropriate influence about too much of the code base because they're the oldest developer in the company. So definitely these work meetings, when you get them down, when the non-working meetings, when you get them down and you don't plan work for somebody who's busy, can immediately improve your incentives for how you're managing your team. I've seen it deliver very, very good results. Again, my clients generally resistant to the idea at first. They try it out and everybody's happy about it. Stakeholders are happier, they're more stress-free, and the teams feel much more involved. Down the line, what can happen is that if there are silos, if the concurrency is very high and silos are happening, then because you're not inviting people to the right meetings, what can happen is that you can then perpetuate these silos. But that is good. You want that signal early to then say, okay, yeah, it's time to stop. Once you're done, once you, the individual, are done, rather than me having another planning meeting with you individually, join that team when you're done, right? So then you can sort of tell people to, okay, when you're done, fold in, like merge with that team, and then just follow the communication channels and just manage the communication channels. Don't manage what the engineers are doing, manage how they're collaborating, with whom they're collaborating, and how often and how much time they have, and how stress-free they are, and how easily encouraged they are to collaborate. That'll help with psychological safety, that'll help with their own sense of fulfillment and gratitude towards the workplace. Then we have the incentives for flow. A great quote that I like to reference is, focus on collaboration over flow over mentoring. Sorry, collaboration over mentoring over flow, and flow over waste elimination. A lot of teams that I work with, leaders especially, they are, just by following generic project management advice and leadership advice, they might cater their team's incentives towards flow or waste elimination. Those are the two I see most commonly. What's an example of flow? So I don't mean flow as this bit of chemical state of I'm in the zone. Flow being more this concept of one developer puts their headphones on, they don't want to be interrupted, and they are like solving one problem solo. And then they create a handoff, right? So they're highly efficient on one step, and then they create a handoff to somebody. These are usually, again, this comes in with the superstar factor of people who want to work alone, and they think they're faster if they work alone, but it really just holds the team back. Knowledge doesn't get shared. Your team might be accidentally over incentivized for flow, which means that then if you introduce things like collaborative meetings, working meetings, pair programming, mob programming, people will say, oh no, we're wasting time because nobody's in flow, everybody's interrupting each other, right? That is a natural sort of gut reaction from a team that lacks psychological safety and is overemphasizing on flow or waste elimination, right? So me sitting next to you on a working meeting, coding together, is considered waste, or is considered harmful because none of us are in flow. Because especially the early 2000s, I think, project management culture that sort of evolved alongside Agile, the certification focused Agile. I think they have created this idea that the most productive unit in your team is one engineer typing very fast at a keyboard. And then sort of that became this sort of atomic unit that everybody wanted to manage and scale. But that's not the case. Yeah, so if you're over incentivized for flow, definitely get more collaboration in, right? So if you're over incentivized for flow, then double down on incentives for mentorship and collaboration. If everybody's in flow all the time, create meetings for collaboration. Put pair programming on the calendar. Incentivize your team members to mentor each other. Have tech talks. Have something that is regularly happening at the cost of flow, at the cost of No, you won't have that 7-hour block of uninterrupted silent mode. We need you to collaborate with that person that nobody wants to work with, or that person who has been in the company and doesn't really have any friends or buddies. The best thing you can do for your team, for your company in general, for your organization, is to make sure that everybody on your team has a peer that they consider a work friend. So that because they will be excited to come to work to spend time with their buddy. And you as the manager, it's really important for you not to be their only buddy. You can be kind of their second, third buddy, but everybody needs a peer with whom they look forward to sort of showing up for. As a minimum. And workplaces that are incentivized for flow generally lack this kind of sort of friendships in the workplace. You can't artificially fix this with team buildings and beers on Friday. It's not going to happen. They need to work together. They need to experience hardship together. They need to challenge each other. They need to be able to call each other's bullshit out. And the best way to do that is for them to actively collaborate and work together and be responsible and to share accountability on an important challenge. At the same vein, sometimes people take collaboration too far. And there's a lot of hand-holding, right? So there might be 5 people on a mob programming session, and one person is passive. One person never does anything. Right? They become this, oh, everybody said it's okay if I'm here, I'm being productive, I'm not feeling any guilt, I'm just gonna be passive and ride this out. So they take a break. Oftentimes this also happens in like planning meetings, or like full executive hands-on meetings, like town hall meetings where you invite 20 people in, and 17 of those are constantly passive. And they're like guilt-free. It's like, yeah, you called me here. I need to be up to date. I don't really care. I'm just going to be on the meeting. That is not collaboration. That is just having plurality being invoked in like a meeting setting. And people are afraid to step out. Right? So if your incentives for collaboration have become dysfunctional, then incentivize people to leave meetings, right? Incentivize people to say, okay, when you call a meeting, please have an agenda. I don't see this often. I see this often where in organizations where there's this HR department or sort of chief of office or people manager sort of got a little bit out of hand, and there's way too much, I don't know, there's way too many tech talks, there's way too much conflict resolution meetings, there's way too much yoga going on, there's way too many company lunches, way too many company dinners, there's just way too much scheduled recurring group activity. So everybody constantly wants to collaborate on everything, but it quickly shirks down into one person taking responsibility for a group project. So you want to make sure that roles get rotated. So if you're mob programming and you have mob programming all the time, create incentives to rotate. Make sure your superstars aren't always the ones making decisions. Make sure your superstars aren't always at the keyboard. Force them to rotate their positions. If you're constantly having meetings with HR or constantly having presentations, make sure the roles switch. Make sure that the people who are listening are also presenting at some point. Make sure that people are incentivized to set an agenda for the meeting so that they can decide not to show up for it if they feel like they need to work on something or meet for a pairing session with somebody else. Again, this is rare. I see this most commonly in sort of startup to scale-up phases or agencies that went a little bit too corporate. These are generally your consulting, your agency-style companies that grew into consulting. It might have like a unhealthy fake collaboration incentive structure. And the last one is investment to mentoring. So the last focus area, your KPIs, is Figure out how people are being mentored, right? So don't do code reviews to find functional problems. If you're doing code reviews, if you're doing pull requests, make sure there's a mentoring element to it. If there's no mentoring element to it, then pair program rather than doing pull requests. If you find it difficult to pair program, have learning sessions about how to collaborate more or how to ensemble and how to mob program. People will resist it, and people should, your engineers are smart and they will want to grow, but they need to they need to decide what their optimal challenge is. So it's possible you're giving them challenges that are not optimal for them. Maybe they're not interested, maybe they're not following their talent, maybe they're not aligned, maybe they don't even know what their talent is and they would need more praise rather than criticism. So definitely you as the leader have first, you have the front row seat for mentoring. You can be the mentor for everybody. You can have one-on-one sessions where you can coach people rather than having status updates. You can sort of try to figure out what they need and inspire them rather than asking them again for their status report. Please don't use one-on-one meetings for status reports. If mentoring is happening and you have a lot of seniors or a lot of skill differences, try to figure out how to reward the seniors for sharing their knowledge, to focus more on teaching people rather than getting the superstar work done on their own. Because the economy of scale works at such a factor that if your long tail is you hire more juniors than seniors, if your senior to junior ratio is very high, and if your turnover rate for employees is 2 to 3 years, you will benefit more from just getting the average up and having a good pipeline than throwing a lot of work at your most competent person. Yeah. Adrian, I'm sure, would have a lot to say about this, and I will have a lot more to say about this next time as well. But seeing the time, let's just touch slightly on the mid-tier metrics. So the metrics that we discussed so far were primarily aimed at the majority of teams. The metrics that we discussed are approachable for everybody. I found these to work most often. They are measurable in all contexts. There's very little area for misunderstanding and very little area for not being applicable or useful. Now, the mid-tier, I like to differentiate low-tier from mid-tier performing engineering cultures as this certification from you have defined a quality guideline and your most able people are able to follow it, right? So a high tier team, there's a quality guideline across the entire team and everybody on the team follows it, right? So even the most junior person has the right training and tooling at their disposal to follow the high quality guidelines to the letter. They know how to create integration tests. They know how to run smoke tests. They know what to do when they have like a security issue on their pipeline or there's a supply chain vulnerability, or if some certificate needs to be refreshed. Like everybody knows what the procedures are. Everybody has enough tooling. So as a collective, everybody is able to follow through on the most important quality metrics. And quality metrics are being defined team-wide. The front-end team has their own quality metrics. The accounting team has their own quality metrics. Like everything is on an organization or team-wide level scope. The mid-tier teams, there are local maxima, local minima, right? So your seniors, so the quality tiers are assembling around your best informal people, where most of the mentoring and coaching happens. So in mid-tier teams, the biggest opportunity is to upskill your more lagging engineers. So your less experienced engineers or engineers who are just confused by your culture, who just didn't quite make the integration into your culture, or who have not been onboarded sufficiently, or maybe onboarding took way too long and they forgot, important details halfway through. If it took them more than 2 days to deploy to production, that might be an issue. right? So in the mid-tier area, your primary goal is to get to continuous delivery, right? So you got through the stress factors, the well-being factors, the having a friend at work factor, and now it's time to like really go all in on process. Standardize what needs to be standardized, get to continuous delivery. You're past the point of doubt where you thought you never took deploying twice per day seriously, because you deployed once every 2 weeks and you thought that was normal and that's the best you can do and you don't need to go any faster. In the mid-tier, you're sort of disillusioned from that and you're like, okay, the faster we can deploy, the better. If I can finish a task in 10 minutes and it's in production in 10, that's a very good goal to have, and we will invest money and time into getting there. So generally, these teams then stop using definitions of done. These teams stop using hotfix procedures because everything can be rolled out if need be. So here, there's much more investment going on in optimizing and, well, eliminating waste in the pipelines. So yes, we have this huge pipeline that we trust, but now we really want to make sure that only the part of the pipeline that needs to run runs. Only the part of the pipeline that has important information gets run. Only the part of the pipeline that can fail, we run that first. Right? So if you know that your unit tests are unreliable and your production tests are reliable, you deploy to production first, you smoke it out, and then you do blue-green. Right? That's something a mid-tier team or a high-performing team would do. A low-performing team, absolutely not. So you start educating your teams more on testing automation, or just how to create pipelines, how to specialize their pipelines, right? So how is the React pipeline different from the Next.js pipeline, different from the front-end pipeline, different from the back-end pipeline, different from the QA pipeline, different, right? So you start stratifying and creating these like very highly optimized platforms for all of your different value streams in your company. And then your specialists, your most talented people, end up building tools and incentivizing and teaching other people how to use these tools. You, as the manager, basically become this dating coach within the company to connect the right people at the right time to make sure these tools are actually serving. So you're dogfooding all the tools in a way that incentivizes people to provide a good service to each other within the company and to your customers. Which includes onboarding, which includes offboarding, which includes mentoring, collaboration, pushing back and negotiating with your product leadership, establishing product leadership, and just really focusing on customer obsession. This is usually the kind of team that struggles with this. Okay, we're going into customer obsession, and the risk is that our high performers will see the light at the end of the tunnel, and rather than wanting to coach the low performers, they just want to be left alone and work alone, right? So that's the risk of devolving the culture back into a low tier team. If you're like highest performers taste victory, and they feel they're being dragged down by people they are forced to collaborate with, right? So that's why this is a delicate balance. From here on, you can slide back immediately back into that upper into this starter metrics if you didn't take these seriously, right? So if you're in a company that's going for continuous delivery and you didn't get past the work in progress and the backlog issues, you're at a very high risk of sliding back into that pit, and your superstars becoming assholes and basically just creating this really high friction rate for employee turnover. It's going to be more challenging to get everybody in the same boat. And you're just going to be oscillating between between mid-tier and low tier, depending on how much pressure your senior management is putting onto the roadmap, putting onto the team, putting onto the timeline, putting onto the budget, how you're faring with the current economy, whether you're doing layoffs, etc. I will talk more about this, and I'm writing a series right now about this transition from low tier, mid tier to high tier to high performing teams. And what are the sort of human problems, the sort of incentive issues that you can run into, and how to deal with them. Okay, so to recap, you want to manage your stress by being able to get less busy. You'll get less busy if you measure the things that make people annoyed in your team. Annoyance will come from there being too much work in progress. Annoyance will come from you not having enough signals because your backlog is too noisy. Annoyance will come from you having too many non-working meetings, especially if they're already scheduled in advance and people don't have a choice to opt out of them. People will be annoyed if knowledge is being isolated in a few brains on the team, and the high flow incentives in the engineering culture and the team culture disincentivize collaboration, mentoring, brainstorming, having tech talks, etc., etc., etc. Right, so all of these little things might seem minor, but you put them together and you create a high stress, sort of high cortisol environment where nobody makes any friends, nobody makes any buddies, and ultimately it just creates a very low well-being factor for work. Adrian is back. Hey, Adrian. I'm just wrapping up. You can join the stage. Come on in.
I'm shy.
So we just wrapped up. I just mentioned the sort of I dipped my toe into mid-tier teams, right? So once you're dealt with the most obvious offenders that basically makes people hate their workplace, then you can start focusing on continuous delivery and customer obsession, right? So that's where you give the team the chance to really develop product leadership, and you go from this sort of project management hell to well nurtured, well provided for product leadership.
Yeah, that's actually quite interesting. So, I missed at least the last hour, but continuous delivery. Oftentimes, I get asked, "Hey, we don't want to do continuous delivery. Can you show us in an hour how to do that?"
Yes.
No,
because they're time
can't.
stressed, right? Because they're time stressed,
Exactly.
and if they haven't dealt with the things that cause them time stress,
Yeah.
then they will continue not wanting to take it seriously, right? So you need to deal with that first. You need to deal with everything that causes people to want to work alone, causes people to work in silos, everything that basically creates a very unfriendly and hyper-competitive environment. And once you get past that, then the knowledge sharing can happen, then the testing automation can happen. A lot of teams that hire me to help them do DDD and TDD, they never get there. We never get there because they are a highly siloed, highly competitive, flow incentivized environment where there's just way too much solo work with way too much work in progress. And nobody really feels that they ever have any spare time. And they feel guilty for sitting next to two other people and only one person's hand is touching the keyboard. Right? So as long as you're in such an environment, there's no space for event storming, there's no space for pair programming, there's no space for TDD, because it's just the culture disincentivizes anything other than high manufacturing production capacity, which we know if you over optimize it leads to the opposite effect. And they just have to go through that growth cycle of learning how to be more lean, how to be more collaborative rather than flow optimized. There's too much flow, too much waste elimination, not enough mentoring, not enough collaboration, right? So the incentives are skewed. Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to do. Seeing as how we had very little viewers, I know it's lunchtime. The reason we're streaming at this hour today is because on Thursdays, I need to get these streams in before I pick up the kids from daycare. Now, I'm aware that this isn't the best time. I'm looking for alternatives. Now, what I'm going to do, Adrian, is I'm going to run an experiment today. I'm going to schedule this recording to rerun again in an hour at our regular streaming time. And I'm going to be in chat on my phone and see if that inspires people. I know that it sort of breaks the promise with live chat participation. But I think we need more data at this point to learn how to navigate the situation. I'm afraid I don't have much choice. I can't get a babysitter every day on Thursdays and Wednesdays ad infinitum for the foreseeable future. So I'll just have to figure out a solution. So this week, today, I'm running an experiment. I'm just going to reschedule this recording as a live premiere in an hour. Let's see what happens. What do you think?
Yeah, just try it. So I'm not sure because it's very, let's say, very spontaneous, but I even had spontaneously a lot of audience already when I did that on Friday, same time as you did today. But no, just try it out. So I don't understand it either. So I was taking a look with my phone for I think 50 minutes ago. Somehow my phone is now making noises. It is a little bit awkward to be on the phone on LinkedIn. It was 1 or 2 minutes until I got something from the stream. So maybe
the video,
it is one reason.
The video performance is quite lackluster on the video player on LinkedIn. It's also burning a lot of electricity. You know, my phone gets very hot on LinkedIn video, but not so much on YouTube. So I don't know. I know that might also be a factor, but that might be just my hardware, but it's not a good sign. Okay, so that's my promise for today. I hope this was educational. This is going to be more on this in the recap, and I'll be posting a little newsletter series about these various metrics, how low tier to mid tier to high tier, high performing teams sort of act differently and optimize for different cadences, optimize for different outcomes. Yeah, as always, you can find us on our tech journey on YouTube and LinkedIn. LinkedIn now has a new LinkedIn page called Our Tech Journey Community. And Adrian and myself, as always, you can find in our respective Substack publications, Snackable CTO and Crafting Tech teams. Adrian, any last words?
No, I actually have the next meeting in 5 minutes, so I already prepared for that. It's a stressful day today, to be honest. Okay. But we'll have next Wednesday again one. I'll take a look, probably something front-end related. I'm looking maybe into bundle sizes. This is some topic which is interesting because many people seem to define modern front-end development by bundle sizes, and that's actually a little bit annoying because it's
an optimization problem that can quickly get out of hand.
Not a real topic, and people seem to judge entire ways of work based on that, and totally contextless. And I think we could spend a good portion of a stream just to have some expectation there, or some clearance what is actually going on there. We'll write about that. So probably announcing tomorrow. So.
Very good. Well, thank you for coming back, Adrian. As always, this was fun. Thank you for watching. More updates coming end of week and beginning of next week. We will continue with this cadence. We're definitely streaming twice a week again. We might switch the hours around a bit, play around with our constraints. And as always, have a nice day. See you next time.
See you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye.